Hello, hello, hello. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'll give you guys some time to jump on. Hello. Good afternoon. Happy Thursday. Hope that you are having a wonderful, wonderful day. If you are on, go ahead on and hit that share button for me. Let someone know that we are live. We're going to continue our conversation today and talking about childhood sexual abuse. So let someone know that we are live. Yesterday was a pretty the topic that we're, let me go back. The topic that we're talking about is not an easy one, particularly for those who are adults, which are most people that join my lives, that are most people that are on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube. Um, for the most part, if you have, if this is a topic that you have dealt with personally, it's not an easy one unless you have gone through your healing journey, your process of healing, and you've already had time to really process some of the things that we're talking about. But a lot of people have not. A lot of people have not. So I commend you for coming back for day two, because the topic is just not an easy topic. We learned that on yesterday, just how widespread these experiences or these instances are happening, and not just here, but everywhere. I'm in Mississippi, but it's everywhere. It's its own pandemic, its own epidemic. So hit the share button if you're in here. If you don't know who I am, my name is Dr. Tiffany. I am a trained marriage and family therapist. I'm also a relationship expert, and in our coaching business, we particularly work with women who have gone through situations like this, as childhood sexual abuse. You'll be amazed at how many people, particularly women, and I'm just saying that because those are the ones that I come in contact with more often. You'd be surprised at how many women have experienced childhood sexual trauma of some kind, or childhood abuse, or some kind of childhood trauma. And what we tend to see with women, or I'm saying women, guys, but I know that some men have experienced this as well. But what we see is that they tend to struggle if they have not processed through it. They've not excuse me, went through their own healing journey. We see some of the repercussions of that in their adult years. So they may struggle with relationships, they may struggle with connecting with other people, they may still have some symptoms of PTSD that come up, or they may be in abusive relationships, or the cycle continues where their children or someone else that they may know or be close to are experiencing some of the same things. So that's the reason why the generational part comes in, the generational trauma, because what we see often in families, and we talked about this the past couple days, is that what we see in families when things like this have happened is that cycles of that happen throughout the family line. And when we talked about generational trauma is just trauma that has been passed down from generation to generation, i.e., childhood sexual abuse. So yesterday we left off talking about symptoms and signs, and what do you look for, and what do what are some of the warning signs that you look for of whether or not a child has been sexually abused. And so we'll pick up there. We'll pick up there and talking about that. So some of the warning signs that we talked about was Nightmares. The child may have nightmares or bedwetting and failing grades and cruelty to animals, bullying and being bullied. Fire setting was another one that we talked about. Runaway behavior, and self harm of any kind. So we talked about that as being some of the signs that a child may be experiencing sexual, or have experienced or have been abused, sexually abused. But I wanted to go in today, because this topic, because of the expansiveness of it and because of how traumatic it is, I didn't want to rush it. I feel like, in social media, we get so much information thrown at us at a time, that this topic, I really wanted to take my time and digest through it, not just for my own purposes, but for yours, particularly for those victims who have not gone through any type of therapy, because in a lot of, a lot of families, you may not have even told anybody. This may be the first time that you may have said it out of your mouth. And so I did not want to rush through talking about the topic because of the amount of trauma that is attached to it. And I wanted to be sensitive to those who may be watching or rewatching the replay. If you're rewatching the replay, this is for you as well. I wanted to be sensitive to the nature of the topic, and also sensitive to your particular situation. And although I may not have your story, I may not know your story, we do know that there are some similarities in some experiences. And so I wanted to be sensitive to that, and I did not want to rush through this topic at all. So we'll start talking a little bit about some more of the signs that we start seeing, and then we'll move into talking about, well, what do you do, what do you do if you see a child, or someone that has mentioned something to you about a child? Like, what do you do? How do you respond to that? Or how do you prevent or prepare your children? Because the reality is, you may not have gone through it, but because we live in a very evil and wicked world, we talked about that yesterday, about how a lot of times the children who have been sexually abused, they know who their abusers are. And I think the stats was like 90% of the time they know their abuser, which means it's people that are really close to them. It's people that they're interacting with on a regular basis. It could be people in your family. And so how do you guard for that? And particularly for those who have experienced child abuse themselves, or child sexual abuse themselves, or is in their family line. Like, how do you guard for that with your children? What do you do? How do you teach them how to recognize it, or how do you teach them and safeguard them, protect them? Teach them how to even protect themselves. Like, what do you do? So we're moving and talking about a little bit of that, and then we'll talk a little bit about grooming today, because grooming is such a big part of child sexual abuse. So we talked a little bit about the spiritual stuff yesterday. I kind of threw it out there yesterday, and the spiritual aspect of what happens when a child is abused, and all of that. We'll push that to talking about it tomorrow. And if we need to drag this into talking about it Monday, then we'll drag it into talking about it Monday. But what I'm not going to do is just is rush through it. So just breathe. Y'all take a deep breath with me. Let's do that. Let's everybody do that. Just take a deep breath. Let's do it again. One more time. And when you're taking a deep breath, one of the practices that we teach in therapy is that you always breathe in through your nose, really deep breath through your nose, almost like it's coming from your stomach. And you breathe out through your mouth. And you do that as many times as you need to. And what that does is lower your levels of anxiety. Okay, so signs of child sexual abuse. What are some other signs in addition to the ones that we talked about on yesterday? Some other signs that we see with child sexual abuse, um, although there will be some physical signs, some of them emotional, some of them behavioral, we'll see. But some physical signs that we tend to see is bruising, bleeding, redness, bumps, scabs around the mouth, um, genital or anal. And what could happen during that process of the interaction between them and their abuser is if that person had some type of STD or STI, I think is what we call them now, STIs, or some type of infection or disease, then that some is passed to the child, sometimes can be passed to the child. So sometimes we see the bruising, the bleeding, the redness, the bumps, the scabs around the mouth, the genital or the anus. Some other things that we tend to see, and I should have told you guys, it's a trigger warning. I put the post out, that the nature of this stuff is, can be triggering. So some other things that we may see is infections, urinary tract infections. And I know, pediatricians or doctors, what they kind of pick up on is that the child may come in and they see some of these things, or they may have recurring UTIs, which is not really something that children will have a lot of. We'll also see STIs, which we talked about that, or abnormal vaginal or discharge coming out of their private areas. I don't want to be censored, so I want to make sure that I am sensitive to the platform. So abnormal e- discharge that's coming from their body, um, are all warning signs that there may be some child sexual abuse, or that that child may have been sexually abused. Some emotional and behavioral things that we will also see is that the child may begin to act out. I think we talked a little bit about that yesterday, that the child may begin to act out. So take a child that in a normal situation or would normally be quiet, have good grades, do their work, come in. Well, all of a sudden that child's behavior changes, and that child starts acting out, and you're trying to figure out what is going on with this, with this child, especially for teachers, because teachers will see a lot of this in the classroom, or if you're working with children on a day-to-day basis, you'll kind of pick up on some things that may not be that child's norm. And now all children are different. All children are different. But as a teacher, when you're working with children all the time, you start noticing, or even your own children, you start noticing their temperament. You start noticing their behavior. So I have a child that I know, that child, if the teacher said it, that child in the classroom, and that child talking, which has been most of my children, except for maybe one, if that child's in the classroom and that child is talking, and no matter where you put that child is going to talk, but all of a sudden the child stops talking, the child becomes very withdrawn, the behavior of that child is very fearful. Or you may notice, that the child may, cry if the women is very anxious or very nervous acting. Or you may see some, what say is, we call it rebellion, or they not want to follow any rules, and it really is their way of just trying to control their own little environment, is really what it is. Or some unexplained anger, like, why all of a sudden, this child is angry. This is not this child's norm. Yeah, they may act out a little bit, but this is anger that we're seeing. This is rage that we're seeing. These are some things that we don't need to ignore, when a child's behavior starts changing, or when they're doing things that are outside the norm of their behavior. So, some other things that we see, and we tend to see this in more older children, is alcohol or drug use. And I know, y'all, we live in a world where some of this stuff is a norm for children. Sad to say that, but some of this stuff is a norm. And sometimes we, because of our own environment and because of our own experiences, we can literally see these things going on with children and say, oh, they just being teens. Or because of our own experience, because we've come through, we're talking about generational trauma, because of the environment that we came from, where children all acted out, or where children all used drugs and alcohol at a certain time, and where children all slept around at a certain time. Like, we can get so caught up in the environment that we came from that we don't recognize when a child is actually trying to tell you something. Their behavior is actually trying to tell you something. And because they're children, they may not have the words to say to you, yeah, this is what happened. And their little bodies and their little minds may not even be able to make sense of what even happened. They may not, even though we just, it's something about our bodies that we just kind of pick up on when something is not right. But because they don't have the language, they don't have the mental capacity to really even communicate sometimes that these things are happening. So you see when you work, especially when you're working with children or you have children at home, what you will see is a lot of times that they'll act out these things with siblings, or they'll act out these things with their toys. So we don't excuse these things when it happened. Those are red flags, and those are times where we should pay attention. So with older children, sometimes we'll see the alcohol use, we'll see the drug use, and usually it's at an early age. So when you see children that are doing these things, guys, let's not just walk past them. Let's try to pull their parents, if you're not the parent, pull their parents to the side and say, hey, I'm noticing something with your child. Maybe you should, sit down and talk with them, or go talk with their school counselors. That's what school counselors are for. And now I know a lot of the schools actually have counselors that are on site, that are there on service on school. I know, because I used to do that. I used to be a child therapist. So some of the schools actually have have therapists that are there that are particularly for issues that children are struggling with. So check with your child's school, which is an excellent resource. They're excellent resource. Okay. So according to this research here that I was looking at, and some that I've been going by, because I always want to make sure that I give factual information, is one of the most telltale signs that a child has had some kind of sexual abuse or have been sexually abused is sexual behavior and language that is not appropriate. My husband and I were out one day, and because this is, I've had many experiences with sexual abuse and with rape and children, and just in the field, because that's what I do. This is what that I'm a therapist, so I encounter things like these, or have encountered things like these. And so we were out enjoying our time, spending time with our children, and just enjoying a Saturday. And this young girl passed by. The young girl could not have been no older than our 11-year-old. In fact, they probably were around the same age. And this child is pregnant. And it takes every bit of what when you're a caregiver, when you're a mother, when you're a parent, when you care about children, when you have a compassion. And I think I probably have a more compassion about things like this, because I've experienced sexual abuse myself. So all of my antennas started going off. Like, this is a child. This child can't be out of elementary school, but she's pregnant. Those are red flags. Now, I don't know if this particular child's situation was that it was someone that was her age. I don't know that. I don't know that. Most 11-year-olds don't just go around having sex. Most 10-year-olds don't just go around having sex. Now, I know things have changed in the world since I was 10. And it's been a long time since I was 10. I'm talking about 30 years almost since I was 10. A lot has changed in the world. But I'm pretty sure from raising 4 children that at that age, they're not thinking about. They may have some emotions that come up, because we're, at that age, you're trying to help them make sense of their changing bodies and all of that. You're at that age. But most of the time, unless the environment is conducive, unless they're seeing it happen, unless they're being sexually abused, most children do not, at that age, have sex. or talking about things that are way more advanced than what they should be talking about, or looking at things that are way more advanced than what they should be looking at. So let's not excuse it. Let's not excuse it when it happens. So let's move into talking about some grooming stuff, some grooming behavior, because I feel like that is relevant. And particularly with what we were talking about, with over 90% of the time, the child knowing who their abuser is. Let's talk about some of the signs of grooming. And if you don't know what grooming is something that typically happens with abusers that or perpetrators that pick out their victims. They typically choose their victims, and they it's usually a process. So they may not in, see them one day, and then the next day, they're carrying out the act with the child. Is usually a process, and that's what that process is, what we call grooming. And so there's some typical patterns or similar patterns that we'll see with perpetrators. And number one is the victim selection. So abusers usually choose their victims, and they usually choose the ones that are the most vulnerable, children that are the most vulnerable, those that they perceive, it's all about their perception, as being the most vulnerable. Um, they also choose victims that they probably have a little bit more access to. And once they do that, they begin the process of maybe isolating them. So they may, hey, why don't you're so special. How why don't you go to the store with me? Or they may pick a favorite, and they may take them off to different places, or they may give them something special that they wouldn't give anyone else. And so this gaining access and then isolating is part of the grooming process. And then another one is trust development and keeping secrets. I've had survivors, and I call them survivors, tell me that, oh, they would tell me certain things about their life that they wouldn't tell anyone else, or they would tell me intimate details about their marriage that they wouldn't tell anyone else. This is a child. Um, Other things that they would say is secrets. This keep this between you and I. Keep this between you and I. Another one is desensitization to touch and discussion of sexual topics. I think I shared yesterday about the story that I was reading about a pedophile, a local pedophile that was arrested here soon, here in our local town, and how all of them said the same, very similar things, that he would say certain things about, about sexual topics, or he would do certain things in front of. All of those are grooming technique. All of the things they were sharing were grooming things. Or they would, the last one is, they would attempt um to make what they're doing seem natural, even though it is natural. It is natural for our bodies to respond, and not for children, but it is natural. And they would try to make it seem like what they're doing, that their behavior and the things that they're doing is natural. And that's to kind of make the child's alarms go down. Or, I'm trying to be very careful about what I'm saying, to avoid raising the child's suspicions. So what do you do? Like, what do you do? Um, what do you do? How do you safeguard it? What do you do? What are some things that you can do to begin safeguarding your children? Particularly if this is in your, if you know that this is a cycle that is in your bloodline, then you really need to pay attention, and you really need to be on your guard in preparing your children. The number one thing that you can do to prepare or to try to safeguard your children is to have conversation with them often. normal conversations about anything. Teach them about their bodies, teaching them about, the appropriate things that their bodies should be doing. Also teaching them about boundaries. And one thing that we talk about is a green touch. What's a green touch? What's a red touch? What's a yellow touch? And helping them to understand that a red touch is no one should touch you like this, or no one should say things like this to you. Or and this is a part of teaching children boundaries. And a lot of times what we see with generational trauma is that children aren't being taught these boundaries because their parents aren't being taught these boundaries, and the boundaries that are being are really being pushed with each generation. And so we see a disintegration of what boundary. I mean, they may not even know what boundaries are because they come from an environment where these things have not been taught. And so in order to safeguard your children, one of the things that you can do is teach them about boundaries early. Teach them about what a yellow touch is. Like, when should you be concerned that this is crossing the line? So if you teach them, they'll know when these things happen. Oh, well, that's crossing the line. They'll be more apt to catch when it's actually they're being groomed. So we teach them kids about boundaries. We teach them about and we don't walk around in fear. We definitely don't walk around in fear. We know these things are happening all around us, but we don't walk around in fear. But we are smart. We are safeguarding our children. So what do you do if you know someone, or if a child comes to you and tell you that a friend of theirs, or if you know a child directly, or if it may be a child that's really close to you that is showing some of these signs or some person that is showing some signs of grooming? Like, what do you do when you start seeing these things? What are some steps that you can take? Um, if you're close to the child, you can ask. I hope that you have a good enough relationship with the child that you can just go and say, hey, you okay? I've noticed some things different about you. I noticed that, you've changed, especially for teachers and parents and those who are interacting, ministers and pastors and people who are interacting with children on a regular basis. Go to them if you notice things about them, and you can have a conversation with them. You can talk to their parents, pull their parents in, or pull whoever is authority figure in them. Hopefully talk to them privately first, because they may not want to talk in front of the authority figure, particularly if the authority figure is the one that they need to talk about. So talk to them separately. Have them go see the counselor. If you feel like, that is something that is outside of what you should do, then have them go see a counselor. I've when I've noticed things about children, I'll call the school counselor and say, hey, you know what, I'm concerned. Can you pull that child and say, such and such? But if you are in a capacity where you're interacting with children, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a child care worker, whether you are in some kind of pastoral church or religious, if you are interacting with children, chances are you are a mandated reporter. That's nurses, that's doctors, that's therapists, that's social workers, that's teachers, like teachers and pastors. You are a mandated reporter, which means that when you see these signs, you cannot ignore. And I was reading some of the stats on this, and now all of the stats is based on the ones that who actually report, and we do realize those are only the ones that report. Some of these aren't even being reported, which is sad. And even when they are being reported, some of the stats is saying that they may tell someone that they trust, tell someone that is really close to them. And when they tell someone that is really close to them, that, although it is a relief for them, it's a temporary relief for them, they still may not receive the protection that they would receive, or the help that they would receive, because the person that they told may just keep it between them. So the key to this is knowing what signs are we looking for. What do we do? So if a child comes to you, or if you are suspected or have some suspects that a child has been sexually abused, go to an authority. Point blank, period, poo. Go to an authority. Go to an authority. Let the authorities who have been trained to handle it handle it. They don't handle it, go to another authority. If you're a mandated reporter, you should be trained on how to handle these situations. Do your job. Do your job. I don't care if you know them. I don't care how much money they got. I don't care how much pull and power they have. report them, or else your license, your degree, your title, whatever position you're in is at risk at that point. And no longer, not only that, but I couldn't imagine knowing something like this and not doing anything about it, and something worse. I mean, it's already that the child is in a worse situation, but something worse happens, and then the it's on you. It will be on you because you didn't say anything. So one way we can begin to break into generational patterns is by not keeping the secrets. Let's not keep the secrets. It's not your burden to carry anyway. To put responsibility where responsibility lies. And I have ended my time for today. Um, if you have any questions, and thank you so much for those who have been commenting. Thank you so much for those who have reached out to me. I really, really, truly appreciate you. Thank you for those who have shared. I really, really, truly appreciate you, because people need to know the facts. They need to know what to do and how to handle these situations. And if at any point in time anything that I talk about is triggering to you, if you find that there's some emotions that come up, book a call with me. Book a call with me and let us figure out what are your next steps to your healing process. How you don't have to navigate this alone. You're not alone. You don't have to navigate it alone. Book a call with us and let us help you figure out what your next steps will be. If you are on Facebook, I've put in there the description box some tools or some resources that you can use or can go about reporting. It should be pinned right below inside of the description or inside of the comments. Just go to the comments, you'll see that. You'll see the crisis helpline. You'll see the suicide helpline. You'll see the national sexual assault helpline. And if you are in need of some extra resources, let me know. I can pull some resources and have those resources to you. But I do not know if you don't reach out. But there are resources all over the place. But we want to make sure to connect you with the right resources. It's imperative that you are connected with the right resources. I love you guys. I see you back here tomorrow. We will get to the spiritual part of it tomorrow, and how generational trauma and how it impacts relationships. So the relationships that you have, the relationships that you may not be able to keep, or we'll start talking about that in the spiritual side of what it does when you have been sexually abused, and how we're not just physical beings, but we're also spiritual beings, and how you attracting the same person with different results is not just the physical things, it's actually also a spiritual. So join us back here tomorrow as we have that we continue our conversation on the community child molester and generational trauma. I love you. I love you so much. You guys have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful rest of your day.